Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to just picture this for a second. You're in an ancient Silk Road bazaar. You're a merchant, doing well. But then you look across the way and you see your competition doing something, well, totally nefarious. They're shaving silver off their coins or mixing in cheaper metals, all to undercut your prices.
Right. So for a day, maybe a week, they get this massive competitive edge.
Exactly. But then what happens? Soon, everyone realizes the currency is debased, nobody trusts the money, and you get total economic chaos.
And that, right there, is a currency war in miniature.
It's the same trick, just on a global scale.
It is. A currency war is really just when countries deliberately push down the value of their own money. Financial pros call it competitive devaluation, and it's all about gaining an advantage.
So the logic is a cheaper currency makes your exports cheaper for everyone else to buy.
Right. It gives an instant boost to those industries. And at the same time, it makes all the imports, all the stuff you buy from abroad, more expensive.
Which nudges your own people to buy local instead.
Exactly.
So, I mean, on the surface, it sounds fantastic. You're basically putting your whole country on sale for the rest of the world. You're boosting your industries, creating jobs. What's the downside? Why is it so dangerous?
The danger kicks in when everyone starts playing the same game. If every major economy tries to devalue at once, it just becomes this vicious race to the bottom.
And the cost for you, the consumer?
It's immediate. It's called imported inflation.
Yeah.
Your money is suddenly worth less on the global stage. So the price of everything you buy from abroad, oil, electronics, coffee, you name it, it shoots up. And the country's economic stability just starts to erode.
Okay, so our mission today is to dive into the toolkit, the history, and maybe the survival playbook for this.
Yeah.
We really need to understand why this powerful short-term fix can, if everyone does it, just wreak havoc on the entire global system. And the history here is just so dramatic because the motivation, getting something for nothing is, well, it's ancient.
It is. And Rome is the quintessential cautionary tale. It shows the temptation of the printing press, centuries before the printing press even existed. So by the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire is fighting wars all over the place, and they need to stretch their silver supply. The solution, they just start mixing cheaper metals into the silver denarius.
Debasing the currency. They were basically fighting a slow, self-inflicted war against their own economy.
That's a great way to put it. And our sources show that by the mid-3rd century, that once mighty silver coin was mostly worthless.
I saw a figure, something like 5% silver content by 215 CE.
Yeah, around there. And the result was completely predictable. Soaring inflation. People just started hoarding any real silver they could find, or they just went back to bartering.
Because the money had lost all credibility.
All of it. And you see that same lesson echo across continents and centuries.
It seems like that temptation to just print more is overwhelming. So what about a place like Song Dynasty China? They actually invented paper money, the jiaozi, a world first.
They did, but the government quickly discovered the dangerous secret behind it. They realized they could print huge amounts of these banknotes without any real reserve to back them up.
And they did this to finance wars, pay their armies.
Primarily. The mechanism of destruction was just simple oversupply. So much paper money flooded the market that its value just plummeted.
So it wasn't just the lack of metal backing it, it was the sheer volume.
Exactly. It became practically worthless by the end of the dynasty. And this all points back to the fundamental economic strategy driving these wars, maximizing net exports.
The X minus M in the GDP equation.
That's the one. Nations are sacrificing the purchasing power of their own citizens through inflation, all for the sake of boosting exports. They just focus on that short-term trade boost and ignore the long-term cost.
Which is that imported inflation you mentioned.
Right, which raises the cost of living, raises the cost of production, and eventually just negates the whole advantage you started with.
Okay, so that brings us straight into the modern era. The weapons aren't silver content anymore. They're, what, quantitative easing and interest rates.
And the reasons are the same. Nations are fighting a recession, trying to boost jobs, or they're dealing with massive debt.
Or they're just retaliating against somebody else's move.
Precisely. And the most chaotic modern example was the Great Depression in the 1930s. Faced with this spiraling economic collapse, nations just adopted what they called beggar thy neighbor policies.
I love that term.
It's brutally honest. They abandoned the gold standard Britain in 31, the U.S. in 33, and they just devalued their currencies to make their exports cheaper.
So everyone was trying to export their unemployment problem onto somebody else, hoping to fire up their own factories by stealing demand from their competitors.
That's it. But this competitive devaluation just turned into a chaotic free-for-all. Trading partners would retaliate immediately. It introduced this wild uncertainty into any international contract.
I mean, who would sign a long-term trade deal if the value of the currency you're getting paid in could drop 20% overnight?
Nobody. International trade just plummeted. And historians now cite this lack of monetary cooperation, as a key reason the Great Depression dragged on for so long.
But these conflicts aren't always just chaotic fights, are they? In 1985, we saw something different, a coordinated truce, the Plaza Accord.
Right. The U.S. dollar had become ridiculously strong. It had risen nearly 50% in the first half of the 80s.
Making U.S. exports completely unaffordable.
Exactly. So the G5 nations, the U.S., Japan, West Germany, France, and the U.K., they actually sat down and coordinated a policy to jointly weaken the U.S. dollar.
And it worked.
It worked. They successfully dropped the dollar.
Yeah.
But even a coordinated move like that can have dangerous side effects.
Right. What did the rapid strengthening of the yen do to Japan?
Well, the sudden surge in the yen made their exports less competitive. So the government tried to counteract that by keeping interest rates really low. And that policy contributed directly to the massive asset bubble that led to Japan's lost decades.
So every move, even a truce, has these unseen costs. Okay, let's fast forward to the 2010s. A new skirmish breaks out, and this time the weapon is called quantitative easing, or QE. For listeners who aren't, steeped in central banking, how did QE become the new weapon?
So quantitative easing is, simply put, when a central bank prints money to buy up financial assets, like government bonds. The goal is to inject cash into the economy to stimulate growth.
And a key side effect is that it weakens the currency.
It often does. By increasing the supply of your currency and driving down the returns on your government debt, capital starts looking for higher returns somewhere else. It prompts capital flight.
And that capital flight hit emerging markets hard.
Extremely hard. The U.S. Federal Reserve's QE weakened the dollar, sure, but it drove these massive capital flows into countries like Brazil. That strengthened their currencies and immediately hurt their competitiveness.
And this is when that famous quote came out.
It is. Brazilian Finance Minister Guido Mantega said, "We're in the midst of an international currency war." He felt the U.S., China, and Japan were all keeping their currencies cheap, and countries like Brazil were just caught in the crossfire.
And then Japan doubled down on this a few years later with Abenomics in 2013. This was a really aggressive push. What was the result?
It was a massive policy shock.
Mm-hmm.
The yen plunged dramatically. It went from about 80 yen per dollar toward 100 and even beyond in just a few months.
Which was a huge win for exporters like Toyota and Sony.
An immediate clear win. Their products were instantly cheaper overseas. But the rest of the world, especially Europe, was rattled. They worried about their own exports. And domestically in Japan, savers and pensioners just watched their lifetime savings lose purchasing power because of the weak yen.
It's so easy to talk about this as abstract economics, but these fights have incredibly real consequences for your wallet. And the most direct one is that imported inflation. Everything you buy from abroad just gets more expensive. Your purchasing power falls.
And to see that at its most devastating, you only need to look at the recent, and I should say self-inflicted, case study in Turkey.
Right. In 2018 and again in 2021, the Turkish lira just crashed catastrophically. The leadership, against all standard economic logic, kept cutting interest rates even with raging inflation. They called it an economic war of independence.
And the market reaction was just brutal. The lira went from about 3.5 per US dollar in 2017 to over 13 by late 2021.
And it's over 30 today.
It is. For ordinary Turks, the effect was devastating. Wages were just eroded by inflation that ran over 80%. People lost faith and rushed toward hard assets, gold, foreign currencies, even crypto, because their local savings were being vaporized.
And the political and social instability that follows that is just immense.
Immense.
Okay, let's look at this through the eyes of a CFO. Someone trying to run a multinational company. Even if your sales are strong, this can just wipe out your gains.
This is what we call the earnings and revenue impact.
Yeah.
When you convert your foreign revenue back into your home currency, a sudden shift can just shrink those numbers dramatically.
Do you have an example?
A great one is Apple. When the yuan was devalued unexpectedly back in 2015, the company took an immediate $8 billion market cap hit in 3 days. And it wasn't because of bad sales in China. It was purely the currency conversion rate.
And sometimes it's not just a hit to profits, it can be an existential threat to the whole business.
That's where we get into what's called economic exposure. It basically means you are structurally vulnerable if you earn your income in currency, A, but you owe your debt in currency, B.
I can see where this is going.
The classic cautionary tale here is Laker Airways in 1982. Sir Freddie Laker's airline borrowed heavily in U.S. dollars to buy his planes.
But he sold tickets in British pounds.
Almost all his revenue was in pounds.
Yeah.
So when the pound plummeted against the dollar in 1981, Laker's dollar-denominated debt cost basically doubled overnight in sterling terms.
Oh.
He didn't have enough hedging in place to cover that massive exposure, and the company just couldn't service its debt. It collapsed into bankruptcy.
A successful business killed by a risk they weren't prepared for.
A tragic, perfect example.
Okay, that is the perfect storm. But the good news is global corporations are not totally defenseless. So this next part is the actionable knowledge, right? The Treasury Survival Playbook. Let's walk through the 5 key strategies that global companies use to fight back.
The first thing to remember is that the goal of a Treasury Department is not to profit by predicting currency moves. That's a fool's errand. The goal is to protect your margins and ensure you have budget certainty.
Okay, so strategy number 1, natural hedging. The best hedge is the one that's free.
Absolutely. A natural hedge just means aligning your costs with your revenue in the same currency. So, for example, a company like Infosys earns dollars from its U.S. clients, right? But it also maintains development centers in the U.S. So by having dollar-cost salaries rent to offset its dollar revenues, it reduces its net exposure to the dollar-rupee exchange rate without having to buy a financial product.
That's smart. Okay, strategy 2, layered hedging. This is about protection from timing risk.
Exactly. You never, ever hedge 100% of your exposure at one rate at one time. Instead, you use financial tools like currency forwards, which lock in a future exchange price, and you layer them. You might hedge 30% of your exposure 3 months out, another 25% 6 months out, and so on.
So you're smoothing out the volatility.
You're smoothing it out, and you're avoiding the risk of bidding everything on one single, potentially terrible prediction.
Makes sense. Third is multi-currency cash pooling. Sounds complex, but it's about internal efficiency.
It is. Large firms like TCS do this. They facilitate internal currency transfers between all their different subsidiaries. So if your German branch has a surplus of euros and your Italian branch needs euros to pay suppliers, you just transfer the funds internally.
You avoid the open market.
You avoid the open market, you reduce transaction costs, you get better rates, and you lower your overall FX exposure.
Number 4, stress testing beyond imagination, because the impossible often happens.
This is so critical. A risk committee might dismiss a 20% currency crash as some unlikely black swan event, but you have to test for a 30% crash. You have to test for capital controls being frozen. Because in emerging markets, these extreme events, Turkey losing 65%, Argentina losing 80%, they're not black swans. They are predictable cycles.
If your strategy doesn't survive that scenario, your company is structurally unsound in that market.
You've got it.
And finally, number 5, you need the technology infrastructure to back all this up. You can't do this on a spreadsheet.
No way. The infrastructure is called a Treasury Management System, or TMS. Modern TMS platforms use AI and automation to give you real-time visibility across all 50 or 100 of your legal entities.
So when a shock hits,
When the 2015 yuan shock hit, companies with a mature TMS could instantly calculate their total risk and lock in hedges within hours. The companies still using spreadsheets, they were still trying to figure out what their risk was 2 days later, and by then the window of opportunity was long gone.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, we have to talk about the modern world's most prolonged monetary conflict. China's managed yuan. This wasn't a sudden crash. This was a decades-long, slow-burn currency war strategy.
That's right. For years, China kept the yuan tightly managed and, frankly, deliberately undervalued. They pegged it as low as 8.28 to the dollar from 94 to 2005.
And that acted like a perpetual subsidy for their exports.
It did. It made China the world's export powerhouse and allowed them to build up over $3 trillion in foreign reserves.
Which really proves that currency wars and trade wars are. They're Siamese twins. You can't separate them.
You really can't. Look at the 2018-2019 U.S.-China tariff dispute. The U.S. put on tariffs to raise the price of Chinese goods. But what did China do?
They let the yuan weaken.
They quietly let the yuan weaken by about 12%, which effectively neutralized a lot of the tariff's impact. It was a trade war fought with monetary policy, and it led to an economic stalemate.
So looking ahead, where is the new battlefield? What's next?
Well, it's moving away from just interest rates and toward financial infrastructure, toward technology. The so-called weaponization of the U.S. dollar through sanctions is prompting nations, especially the BRICS bloc, to actively develop alternatives.
Like BRICS pay.
Exactly. It's a direct challenge to the dollar's dominance in global trade.
And maybe the most significant development here is something called mBridge.
Mbridge is the new payments arms race. It's a multi-central bank digital currency platform. It's led by the central banks of China, Thailand, the UAE, and the Bank for International Settlements.
And the goal is to bypass the dollar entirely.
The goal is to allow instant, real-time cross-border payments in local currencies, yuan, baht, dirham, without ever touching the US dollar or Western systems like SWIFT. They're building a genuine, non-dollar alternative for global trade.
So we've gone from merchants shaving silver coins to major nations building blockchain systems to dethrone the world's reserve currency. The dynamics are the same, but the stakes are exponentially higher.
The stability of the entire financial system rests on this fight.
So what's the core lesson here? We've seen from ancient Rome to modern Japan that competitive devaluation. It's tempting for a short-term fix, but it seems to lead to imported inflation, instability, and a loss of credibility.
I think the lesson is that in a currency war, the only real victory is to not have one at all.
Right.
And for you, the listener, the ultimate takeaway has to be that trying to predict exchange rates is a fool's errand. There are just too many factors. Central bank policy, geopolitics. You can't guess it.
So the focus has to be on preparation, on resilience.
It has to be. Using those Treasury playbook tools we talked about, dynamic hedging, diversifying geographically, and just building a strong defense that assumes volatility is the new normal.
So a final provocative thought, the US dollar is still, overwhelmingly dominant, but history shows that global powers always eventually seek alternatives. They seek autonomy. If major nations do successfully bypass the dollar using these new systems like Mbridge, what happens to the US economy and, crucially, to your purchasing power when the dollar is no longer the world's required currency for global trade? That is a question worth exploring next.